Well, in the middle of today's reading, we come to 1 Corinthians 13. And if you remember, Corinth was a very spiritually immature church. And all of them apparently in the church wanted the ability to speak in tongues. And Paul addresses this issue over these 3 chapters. That is really the main theme of these 3 chapters. He's addressing their wanting to speak in tongues. And so he reminds them in chapter 12 that there are many different spiritual gifts. In chapter 13, he reminds them of how they are to behave with one another, that love is more important. And then he addresses specifically spiritual gifts. The speaking in tongues there in chapter 14. And I don't see how anyone can read, especially chapter 14, and come away and say that you have to speak in tongues in order to be saved. I just don't see it. But there are those that believe that. But chapter 13, it reminds us that love is very important. In chapter 13, we need to be reminded that this is written to the church. We oftentimes think of it as to lovers or romantic love, but 1 Corinthians 13 is written to the church. And so let me read to you 1 Corinthians 13, verse 4 through 7. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love does not envy, is not boastful, is not arrogant, is not rude, is not self-seeking, is not irritable, and does not keep a record of wrongs. Love finds no joy in unrighteousness, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. Now, as I said, when we look at 1 Corinthians 13, we oftentimes think about it in relation to romantic love, like between a husband and a wife. But this is written to the church. And because of their jealousy of wanting the gift of tongues, they were acting in unloving ways towards one another. And we can act unloving toward one another in the church today. And what happens a lot of times is that bitterness will come into our lives. We become resentful, we become cynical, and this bitterness inside of us begins to eat away at who we are. And now let me ask you, have you ever been hurt in church? Well, if you haven't, how great that is. But if we're not careful, we can let bitterness take over our life. And so here's the challenge. Reread 1 Corinthians 13, especially verses 4 through 7, and think about it in the aspect of the church and how people may have treated you or how you've treated people in the church. Well, reread and then practice what it says to love one another in the church in that same way. Ask the Lord to reveal if there's any bitterness in your heart and ask Him to root it out. And so let's battle the bitterness.